Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Aleksei Kozuliaev from the Eurasian Subtitles League, and I'm going to make a presentation on the translation of educational videos in the COVID era, which became a sudden challenge for the audiovisual translation industry. Actually, the rise of educational videos is a recent development. Well, they were used in the process of teaching before, but prior to the COVID-19 outbreak, educational videos were treated mostly in three rows as a nice complement to traditional offline teaching courses, as parts of larger MOOC courses, and or innovative online platform formats like TED or Coursera, but they were not mainstream. But the epidemic brought them to the fore as the educational process went online. There was a pressing need to maintain interest in school and university level studies. And the only way to meet it was to adapt more laws of fiction video storytelling for educational videos and to research the phenomenon of educational videos translation, which turned out to be slightly or not so slightly different from the traditional audiovisual translation. Well, actually, there were four challenges, and all of them were major. Why? What are these challenges? The first of them is the abundance of terminology in educational videos. In that respect, they are similar to corporate videos, to technical videos. So abundance of terminology which cannot be changed or replaced by some descriptive ways. Then there were traditions, and there are traditions of national scientific style language. Then edutainment requirements. I will expand on that a little bit later. Then cognitive overload. This is the final, I should say, final, last but not least factor in the audiovisual translation of educational videos. Well, what is abundance of terminology? In 2019, our group conducted a study on how strongly an increased amount of terminology influences the language of educational videos. The hypotheses to be verified were, well, number one, terminology in educational videos couldn't be compressed or replaced, thus making it almost impervious to the principles of transcreation or pseudo-orality, which I applied to fiction audiovisual translation. This number two, Russian matches for English terms usually have more characters, thus getting in the way of free constraining of audiovisual translations. Well, the language of about 5 hours of TED video lectures on linguistics was analyzed and compared. The following data was obtained for the English-Russian language pair. Educational videos in linguistics had 72% more unchangeable terminology per hour than regular fiction videos. Actually, we regarded terminology as totally irreplaceable pieces which cannot be replaced by it or some description or some other pronoun. Well, they are to be translated as they are. There were areas of videos which were excessively terminology heavy, especially conclusions. Well, towards then the amount of terminology per minute grew at a very rapid rate. We counted occurrences of terms as the narrative proceeded, and towards the end of narrative, it grew at a very rapid rate. Well, evidently, it was done by lecturers on the assumption that students already adopted this terminology in the course of a lecture. English equivalents of Russian equivalents of English terms were on the average 45% longer. But there was a considerable chunk of terms used in the lectures that were twice as long as their English counterparts. And we also kind of make an assumption that this study should be conducted not only for linguistics but also for other subjects, because these chunks of long terms in Russian might be even larger, for example, for chemistry, for physics, and some other subjects. What are our research conclusions? Audiovisual translation of educational videos requires a special way to apply basic principles of audiovisual translation. We mean pseudo-reality, constrained translation, and transcreation. It looks like a separate subdomain of audiovisual translation, and evidently it should be taught separately. At least that's what we do in our School of Audiovisual Translation. We teach game translation and educational video translation as separate subsubjects. The rattling reading and dubbing speed makes the core material hard to understand. When we speak quickly or rapidly, it is hard to understand, to follow your thoughts. And in fact, it makes subjects of educational videos less accessible, even for hearing and vision unimpaired audiences. And that means that certain principles of accessibility should be applied to the adaptation of the material for making educational videos. There should be a set of recommendations for educational visual storytelling, and these recommendations should be developed jointly by educators, audiovisual translators, and video producers, so that educational videos could become effective teaching tools and their accessibility could be improved. And we mean by accessibility, we mean the ability of the student to digest the information that is presented to them. Then, traditions of scientific style language. This assumption was researched on the basis of the Russian scientific style language, although some of the conclusions are apparently applicable to other languages. Russian scientific style language is very hard to perceive, even by native speakers, due to the complexity of syntax and unfortunately, little attention to readability and transparency of a narrative. Well, probably this does not restrict itself only to Russian, but I'm not referring to other languages. Irina Shoshina in 2016 conducted a study comparing the length of the same statements written in a colloquial oral presentation style and scientific article style for humanitarian subjects. The so-called verbosity quotient was 2.8 times. In other words, Russian scientific articles spent 3 times more words than oral presentations to deliver the same amount of information. Well, it became already a stuff for jokes, but it is no joke when it is applied to the audiovisual translation of educational videos. But there is an obstacle. We conducted a perception study among linguistic scholars of audiovisual translations of several presentations on theoretical grammar. There were about 30 participants in this study, aged from 25 to 70, with different academic degrees. At least 10 participants had doctorates. They were split into 2 groups. Group 1 listened to voiceovers that were abridged and adapted to maintain the normal speaking tempo, and Group 2 watched videos with subtitles that were adapted to Netflix guidelines. After that, both groups were asked to evaluate 2 parameters on the scale from 1 to 10. And the parameters were easiness of understanding. How easy it was to understand the subject and how well the material was presented for the general public. And the second parameter was appropriateness of the narrative for a scientific program, whether the language was perceived as scientific or not. The results were pretty peculiar. Easiness of understanding was rated at 7.7 points, and appropriateness for a scientific study was rated as 3.1. While AVT translations of educational programs were labeled by the scientific community, teachers, scientists, as unacceptable, too simplifying, somehow primitive structurally, lacking linguistic structure. Well, it is evidently, it means that they were not written in the customary scientific language style with all long periods and complex sentences. Well, as a conclusion of the study, a discussion followed, and two key points were highlighted for audiovisual translation of educational videos. Well, they are somehow mutually exclusive, but still represent them both. A separate guide for AV translations of educational videos into Russian should be developed, with sets of rules for simplification, reading speed, rewording, etc. And it should be made a subject of discussion in the scientific community. That was recommendation number one. And the second one was more radical. Well, honestly speaking, I do agree with that one. Rules of the Russian scientific style language should be amended to incorporate the requirements of the new media. Otherwise, there will be more new media as we go virtual reality, augmented reality, mixed reality, and all of them will have scientific materials created using these technologies. And it will be quite evident that there should be some amendments made to the scientific style of the presentation. Otherwise, it would become untranslatable or will be difficult to translate. Edutainment requirements. It's important that educational audiovisual productions need to be emotionally engaging. Well, the educational process quit classrooms. What it means, classrooms were spaces created specifically for the exchange of knowledge for, it's like factories, knowledge factories. Classrooms are with us no longer because educational process moved home. And at home, in homes, it becomes edutainment. It actually competes with other pastimes, such as games, TV series, social media. Well, a student has a choice of either playing a new game, watching a video, or watching your program just by turning off the screen during the Zoom presentation. And while you see the black screen, a student is free to do whatever he or she wants to. Well, this is the harsh reality of the post-COVID epidemic, of the post-COVID time. It means that this educational video narrative needs to be built using more laws of visual storytelling, involving more graphics, moving images, etc. Therefore, when translated, for us translators, it means that when translated, all these visual supports must be translated and localized as well. But currently, very few courses allow for local versions. They have graphics, they have a lot of text on screens, but these presentations are not given in the format that that can be changed. If an original presentation is text heavy and has the voice of the speaker behind that text, it cannot be properly subtitled because subtitles compete with the on-screen text. Or dubbed, you cannot just say, and it is written on the screen this, and this. No, because you have to dub the voice of the speaker, and the on-screen text loses its importance. And what's worse, becomes a distracting factor. We conducted a research on how students rated current educational videos compared to other entertainment and edutainment sources. Well, it was quite predictable, but still we did some research to verify that. Edutainment included Discovery and other educational programming. About 200 students were asked to fill in a questionnaire ranging TV series, games, discovery programs, and educational videos from Coursera, on the scale from most engaging to least engaging. And only one student voted for Coursera being number 2. And the rest of the students positioned educational videos as the least entertaining ones. We asked why. The most frequently quoted reasons for that were visual dullness. Well, they were visually dull. We will get to that a little bit later. And sensory overload. Now we come to the issue of the sensory overload. High presentation tempo, high density of information, and little regard to laws of visual narration in educational videos lead to the sensory overload among audiences. A physiological and psychological reaction to that, as we know from the cognitive sciences, is that our brain blocks varying information input channels. And repeated research of various institutions shows that usually the most overloaded channel is blocked. In the case of educational videos, it is the visual one. This literally wastes the value of educational videos. Some students point out that audio podcasts are currently even more effective as teaching tools. Right now, we're in the middle of the cognitive evaluation of several university educational videos of the St. Petersburg State University of Aerospace Engineering. We are using eye tracking and electroencephalography techniques. Initial measurements, we are right in the middle of the research, but initial measurements are pretty interesting, although it is too early to make conclusions. Eye tracking shows that the activity of the eyes decreases approximately after 7 minutes of watching almost all educational videos. That might mean we still need to verify that by an electroencephalography that the video channel is getting more and more blocked. But it might be something different. Still, respondents mostly give correct answers to questions, checking the understanding of the videos if these questions relate to the information in the soundtrack, not in the video. Well, it contributes to the assumption that the video channel is getting blocked. And graphic representations are recalled better when given in the format of memes, not graphs, not tables, but memes. I understand that, right now the educational process is meme poor. But this is how the new generation packs the information. This is a hypothesis which still needs to be verified. So these are the basic findings of our several stages of our research of the audiovisual translation of educational videos. And the conclusions are incorporated into the body of our teaching courses. We actually are doing that to improve the audiovisual translation teaching courses of our school. Well, I thank you for your attention, and I hope that you may ask us or more questions or have some discussion points. Do not hesitate to contact me at the following address. And the European Subtitles League is also open for joint research projects in 2021. Thank you for your attention.